Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Brief. Today, we're very fortunate to have Robert Roche with us. Hey, Robert.
Hey, it's great to be here, Chris. Thanks for joining me.
So, Robert, you're the VP of Marketing with The Last Mile. Can't wait to dive into all the great work you guys are doing. But before we get to that, why don't you start off by giving us a bit about your background and what led you to where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I love telling my story because for many folks, it can be inspiring from the perspective of you don't always need to be doing exactly what you think you should be doing to build your career. I started out as a musician. I actually still am a musician. And I was making music for soundtracks for TV shows, touring in bands. And one of the parts about being a part of that life, I was working as a lifeguard and a swim coach while making music, trying to do this thing. And I found myself, there's obviously love music, but also I found myself enjoying these skill sets that I was building around promoting our band, creating websites, promoting our shows, learning Photoshop and video editing to make our music videos. And that stuff just started to snowball a bit where I'm saying, okay, maybe I can use these skills. So I went from that into a more kind of I did some work I started playing around in marketing for a while, and then I became a podcast producer, and I worked as a podcast producer for a couple of years. And that was just, as a one-man show podcast producer, if you want to learn marketing real fast from all kinds of different perspectives, it's a great way to do it. It was for a show called Forward Obsessed, which is all about entrepreneurship. So I'm sitting here, every episode is all about the arc of an entrepreneur from, coming up with the idea to selling the organization. And I'm learning so much sitting in that room, but also creating all of this content, articles, web pages, clips, learning how to promote it, learning how to get press around it. And this little microcosm of entertainment started to spin out. And, all of these things in terms of marketing is interesting for me because even as a musician, as an artist, you're trying to think, how do you trigger emotion? How do you trigger emotion with a song or an image, a title of an article? How do you provoke an ethical action an action that is aligned with your values and what you want to happen in the recipient, that's natural and organic, and most importantly, self-replicating? And that's something that I was really focused on. And, from my side, looking at the way marketing is done in the modern world, I think a lot of our marketing systems are broken. They're often optimized to show the audience a reality that they don't have, right? To create a perspective based on lack, attempting to provoke action based on a perception of deficit. And our entire lives, from when we're little children, we're bombarded with media that's built on this premise of deficit. And so, something I set out to do was build a new philosophy around marketing that's ethical, that's based in abundance, that's shown the audience that they're capable of participating in movements that actually improve the world in their lives in the way that they want, showing them what's possible, but through their own actions. And, that's when I really started to realize, okay, I want to be a part of an organization and a mission that fits this goal. And so we know two of the episodes, sorry, my wife is waving at me from my window. She's coming back with my 4-year-old from daycare right now.
I love it. Nice.
And two of those episodes on Forward Obsessed, that podcast I mentioned, were first Chris Redlet's, the founder of The Last Mile. And he has this incredible background. He was one of the founding marketing VPs for Reebok. By the way, you should have him on your show. Incredible story there. When they were in competition with Nike for the biggest market share in the United States, they were totally in competition through the NBA. It's this whole incredible story. But when he got to The Last Mile and started talking about what they were doing, I was blown away by his perspective on taking systems that everyone takes for granted, like the prison system, and saying, okay, like through an entrepreneurial mindset, let's flip this on its head. How can we find something that is broken, in this case, a prison system that on average has a 60% recidivism rate across the country. That means that 6 out of 10 people within 3 to 5 years, they're going back to prison, right? And so, fundamentally, the question that you ask in your mind is, what is the point of this system? Is it to store human beings, or is it to rehabilitate them so that when they enter into society, and 99% of them do re-enter society no matter what, that they are now contributing members of that society in such a way where, at the very least, they don't end up back in prison. And that was the premise of why the last mile and where it came about. And I can go deeply into it, the whole origin stories of the organization. But I can also go into what it is that we do now, if you're more interested in hearing that.
Well, let's start actually by yeah, you touched on that you're an active musician now. What genre of music and what band? Any bands that we would maybe know along your journey?
Yeah, no bands that you're gonna know. All small time. You know, I actually live out here in Germany now. Um, I support my wife is actually a world-renowned developmental biologist, and she's pursuing some of the biggest questions in the origin of life at the Max Planck Institute here. So we moved here in August 2024 to help her pursue that dream, and we brought our kid and our dog, and it's been a really wild adventure. And so I've started over a little bit from scratch, but one musician you can check out, one of my previous projects you can go check out that has a lot of great stuff online. It's called Bond Villain, BOND Villain, and that's got some cool stuff. And we got a few placements on TV shows with that group, so highly recommend it.
So, what genre of music are we talking about? Yeah,
Sorry, I got to pause you for one
that's
second.
right.
Hey, bud, I love you so much, and I just got to finish this call, okay? I'm sorry, brother.
That's
This
all
is
right,
Hugo. There he is.
everybody.
Okay. Hey, Al, I'm on an interview. Go. Can you close the door?
That's awesome. That's real
Hold
life
on.
right there.
That's real life right there, 100%. Let me
Mhm.
close that door. All right, cool. You might have to edit that or not, whatever works for you.
Yeah, no problem.
What was
It's
your
all good.
question again?
So, what genre of music and what instruments are you? Are you a vocalist? Are you a guitar? I see you got guitars in the background. What's your
Yeah.
thing?
I am a vocalist first and foremost, always have been since I was a kid. Being up on stage performing, mic in my hand, since I think my first show was covering Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana with my 7th grade band at a
Nice.
talent show. And I did a lot of digital composition, so I'm very proficient on the piano. And then when I became a father, you got to pivot, right? I can't be in front of the computer all the time. So I really started to pick up the guitar, and now where I'm at is more singer-songwriter, very much a folk musician in many ways, folk Americana. A lot of kind of intricate guitar, finger picking style with some smooth vocals on top. So that's where I'm at now.
Very nice. Yeah, as a marketer, I've used music in many, many ways and sonic branding in very, interesting ways. And, music, having worked internationally most of my career, music is one of those international truisms of common connection, right? And it just, I'm curious, are there parts of your current activity marketing wise where you integrate music or sound design in that your musician's ear brings a special kind of impact to the mix?
100%. First of all, on the inside of prisons, there just is an incredible wealth of talented people who have completely dedicated themselves to learning a craft in terms of music. And, we were playing around with an idea for a while of doing a talent tour where we go in and help produce music for folks on the inside. And listen, I'm never going to say that idea is dead because it was so cool, but there's a lot of limitations on the inside of prisons. But um, right now, what we are, when we create content, if you go on the Last Mile social media, we create a lot of video content, showcasing folks from the inside. And a big part of storytelling when you have, is music. Obviously, if you have someone who's, and this is part of the training that I give the folks. There's a lot of justice impacted people on our team. They create all of our clips, all of our content. And part of what I teach them is, hey, we're not just delivering a voice or a face, we're delivering an emotion, right? And as the artist of this little piece of content that goes on social, you are crafting that emotion and guiding the listener in such a way that they know where they're being led, and then also they're kind of helping create that narrative in their own minds. That's why I love movie soundtracks. Right? You can bring up any Hans Zimmer or John Williams soundtrack, and there's no words. You might not even know what the movie is about, but as soon as you start listening to it, you're seeing a scene in your head, right? You are a part of the movie. If you're listening to if you're listening to a soundtrack from your favorite movie or whatever, or a movie you've never heard of, you're walking down the sidewalk, all of a sudden you're in that movie,
Mm,
and you're the actor. And that was something that fascinated me from when I was a little child, and I would hear about these how is it that emotion can just come to me through sound? And it's something I've always been fascinated with, the way that they could take the Darth Vader theme and play it for indigenous people who have never even been around a speaker system in their lives, and ask them in their native language, what emotion do you feel? And they say, oh, this is the emotion of like evil, this is the emotion of darkness, and that's a magic power that we have as human beings. And I think it's something that is when it's employed correctly, it can be one of the most powerful parts of marketing in every
mm,
single way.
mm. Yeah, totally.
100%.
Um, so one of the things we're actually personally, and then through our company, we actually support early childhood education. And there's a nonprofit we work with that supports the industry and providing free content for educators and administrators. And we do that partly because we know that in the lower socioeconomic and underprivileged communities, um, without it, children enter kindergarten unprepared, and the probability of them entering the penal system at some point or some other having the wrong course in life is like exponentially higher. And so it's a early touch place that we can try and affect that that outcome before it happens. You're obviously on the other end of that, right? The last mile is they're already in prison. Tell us how the name came about, and then where your focus is, and how you've seen the greatest ability to make an impact
Yeah.
with folks that when they do come out, so that they don't return.
Yeah. So, when you've got someone who's on the inside, they've been inside for decades. Uh, they are fully acclimated and fully built into a system and they're surviving it. They might even be thriving within that system. Um, they might be going, being part of groups, have community, but once they exit that system, they've completely exited all of their comfort zones and all of their supports for the most part. And this is where that recidivism number that I told you about earlier comes into play. People come in, it's very misunderstood the realities of reentry for people coming out of prison, how difficult it is, not just to get a job or to get a bank account, but to go to the grocery store and operate a self checkout, to start a Gmail account, to operate a smartphone if you've never even seen one in your life. These are reentry realities of reentry that are completely outside of uh people's comprehension for the most part. And it's something that hundreds of thousands of people go through every single year. And it's very much it really does play well into what you were just talking about in terms of early education, because these are I've got a 4-year-old right now, right? And we just dropped him into a whole new environment here in Germany, and that was a very difficult process. He had a whole a whole assimilation experience, and it comes with a full reset of what your kind of consensus reality looks like,
Hmm.
both for yourself and your consciousness, but around all the other people that you're around. And now, when someone's at the end of that, let's call it a multi-decade period of being in prison, the question is, how do you get them ready in such a way that they're able to enter in when they're in that last mile of their time in prison, right? They're about to finish that marathon of having served their time and serving their debt to society, and they're ready to come re-enter society and become a part of that community? How is it that you prepare them so that they finish their time in prison and then that is the last time that they ever come back, right? That's the last month, right? And the thing that we're thinking about is, okay, reentry is not just about giving them some knowledge on the inside and helping them prepare, and then giving them opening the gate for them and saying, all right, good luck. It's a whole process from start to finish, in the same way that you might educate any person, from a young person to an adult who's entering into a completely new system. They need support through that whole process because it is a long and unpredictable process. And so the last mile, we build systems that for just as impacted people to build a stable, successful life. And it's not a one-off. We start with prison education on the inside. It's rigorous. It's designed to be highly relevant to today's economy and to our career, our current labor market. And we stay with people through reentry, through their employment, through their career growth. That continuity really matters. Most people return home from incarceration with talent and motivation, but without access to opportunity, without access to support. And we focused on closing that gap. And we also want to make it really measurable and accountable and grounded in outcomes. We don't make decisions willy-nilly. We're doing a randomized controlled trial on the inside, one of the first that's ever been done in prisons on this scale, to truly prove that what we're doing against a control group is helping and is going to have long-term positive impacts and should be done on a national scale. So, and the other part of it is that the last mile was founded and is fully based upon an entrepreneurial mindset. So everything that we do is new and innovative and has never been done before. Prior to us, there were not computer labs in prisons across the country on this scale. We have all of our instructors are remote instructors who call into the prisons. That's built on a technology, a learning platform that didn't exist before us. We built it from scratch. And now we have secure internet connection that allows remote instructors to call in from all over. I've called into prisons multiple times from here in Germany to bring the best possible resources you can and the best educators you can to these people. And that gives us so much agility and so much diversity in what we bring to the folks on the inside that we can pivot quick. And, if something brand new happens, like AI, we can pivot. Let's pivot quickly and let's go. Okay, cool. So we teach mostly coding, but AI is going to be killing coding. Guess what? The last mile's curriculum is about to expand 5-fold in the beginning of 2026. I got a little bit of a tangent there from your original question, but
No, that's great. I mean, aside from the ethical and moral obligation we should have towards inmates that are, we're trying to help them return to society in a meaningful way. So they're contributors versus a cost and a drag or a risk to society. Um, so that you touched on, I think, but I just want to clarify this. It sounds like there's a very reasonable quantification around the economic impact, which, we sadly, the number one priority for all, kind of growth in any business is economic. If there isn't an economic story, the moral and ethical stuff, is harder to get people to, to consider and adhere to. Have you been able to quantify the impact in any way yet or is that kind of a work in progress?
it is, I'm really glad you asked this question because we know it. If the answer to your question is we know that there's a huge economic benefit to what we
Yeah.
do, and part of our research, our randomized controlled trial, part of what we're working on and with other research teams is finding ways to uh, undisputably prove it. If I wish that all the politicians would just make the decision based off of the economic argument, because it, every single person who's on the inside is paid for by taxpayers, just to start. All right. And we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes per person per year, depending on the state. And each one of these folks, when they come out, if they're returning back to prison, that is just a continued suck on the amount of money that's being pulled from what could potentially be used for other social services into this person's recidivism cycle. Now, if that person instead were to come out of prison and start a company or start working, a high paying job, and not only that, but inspiring people in their own families and their own communities to follow in their footsteps, proactively breaking their own cycles before they even start, for example. Uh, the if we're talking economics, the benefit is almost immeasurable on a longer scale, right? Because now we're seeing this flowering exponential effect from just potentially one person, and we have had so many anecdotes and testimonies of a person who's gone through the last mile, who comes from a family of incarcerated people coming out. And not only did they break their own cycle, they broke the cycle for their children, they broke the cycle for their cousins, they break the cycle for the people in their community. Now they're a community leader. And that is they're changing the entire face. One person is changing the face of his entire community in the way that they're interfacing with their own futures. And that, I think, if we can find a way to measure that, and we're working on that, it's only going to further prove the fact that this is the way that rehabilitation should look in the United States.
No, no, that makes sense. The, one of the things we often think about in working with clients is who's the enemy or what's the barrier to being successful, right? Um, the commercial, in the prison system is a money maker. And so in some respects, part of what you're working against is the headwinds of their, uh, you know, desire in some respect to continue to do what they do and to not have that impacted. Like, I mean, society, I think writ large would agree that if we didn't need prisons, that would be a wonderful outcome. We would all win if that were the case. And yet, if you're in the business of incarceration and supporting that, it seems like the commercial interest is actually staying in business and growing it and making your profit margins better. um, is that something that you face on some level, or is that just a reality that you don't really face? It's not a pressure that you're really working
Mm.
against.
In terms of the prison systems, what's interesting is you just look at who is open to working with us, and then you'll find the systems that are interested in changing and evolving and creating better outcomes. There's not a single private prison in the United States that's interested in having the last mile as a part of their programs on the inside.
Yeah,
They have, that is an antiquated system that should be completely abolished. That is fully operating off of a profit model using human bodies. And it's a continuation of systems that have existed for hundreds of years in the United States that stem back to the 1600s. Um, the systems that do work with us, and we have some incredible departments of correction across the United States, in all the states we're working with, California, Indiana, Massachusetts. These are incredible departments of correction and prison systems that they're interested in creating better results. California has closed multiple prisons in the last year. They want to have less people inside, and they're putting their money where their mouth is. Have a look at the new San Quentin facility that they've just built. That is one of the most premier educational centers in a prison in the entire world. And the last mile has the largest footprint. We installed all the technology that's in there. And you want to see where the future of incarceration or rehabilitation through incarceration is. Look at these facilities that we're working in, because they're the ones that are the most interested. But, to answer your question on a larger scale, this is why I love this job so much, is because our biggest challenge is the perception of the concept itself.
yeah,
People think, why should I support someone who's done a crime and is now on the inside of a prison? Why should I support them getting something that not even I got to have? I didn't get to have coding classes brought to me for free, is there sometimes, or, and there, now we've got a laptop program where we're bringing in, state of the art laptops to folks on the inside so that they can have that device with them at all times and be learning on it all the time. And the answer that we always have to them is, you know, almost every single one of these people is going to be coming back into your society in one way or another, right? What kind of person would you like to be rejoining your community? And it is not for free. They have given up every single one of their freedoms. They do not go to the bathroom. They do not eat. They do not go outside and see the sun without permission, without someone escorting them. And, the price that they are paying the price for their crimes. And we are helping them, instead of going through that process, reentering society, experiencing reentry shock, experiencing all these, difficulties that I was describing, and then being unable to cope and going back to prison. Instead of that, we are creating systems where these people will come back and they are going to be a positive member of your community. Now, that's my challenge. In terms of blockers, it's the perception itself.
Yeah.
And that's the great part about being in marketing department at the last mile is okay, this is the story that we need to tell, and we want to have as many human beings as possible to hear it, understand it, ask questions, challenge us, all of those things.
So that leads right into the next question, which is who, as a marketer, who is your audience, and what are you asking them to, what action or behavior are you asking them to take?
Great question. Yeah. So we actually have segmented a lot of our different communications to a few different audiences. And we have many channels. We exist on all social media platforms. We also have a really active newsletter. We're constantly creating content, both from, industry leaders, systems thinkers, researchers, justice impacted people who have lived it. And so all of these different pieces of content are being created. And our goal is to deliver content to everyone, obviously, but also to help a few specific groups. There's the big group, which is people who don't quite understand. This is what I was talking about, is the sea change, the perception. There are folks who are not who are not justice involved in any way, who are not system impacted through their families. They're taxpayers. They're going about their business. And what we're trying to create is like a national sea change in terms of the understanding of why these services are so essential for us now and for us 20 years from now. But then there's also this huge population, millions and millions of human beings in the United States who are system impacted in some way. And they have family who are on the inside. They were previously on the inside. They are even on the inside in many of these facilities. And we create lots of content for folks who are on the inside of prisons. And we are helping them with resources, with new perspectives, and in the case of folks who are on the inside, with services that help them completely reorient the trajectory of their lives. You mentioned early education. One of our programs that we're incredibly proud of is our scholarship program. Now, this is right now, it's currently just for the children of our students, but these are people, there are millions of children across the United States who are the children who have parents who are in prison, and they are some of the most at risk people in the country for potentially going to prison themselves, right? And this scholarship program, we have found undisputable research that if they receive higher education and support systems, that cycle of incarceration can break. And so we are, constantly trying to create content that's speaking to that group as well. Of course, as a nonprofit, we gotta get our funding too, right? So we're also speaking to large scale funders. We are speaking to small funders. We're speaking to potential partners. We are now launching a platform that allows not just our services, our modules, educational modules, to be taught on the insides of prisons, but now we're going to be able to bring other organizations on our platform. For the first time, this technology has never existed. And we're we're going to be expanding this. Okay. Do you, do you want to teach folks in Indiana your services so that when they come out, you have a huge workforce that's being developed on the inside of prisons that when they come out, now you can start to potentially access them and give them high paying jobs. So these are the kinds of partnerships we're also starting to develop.
So talk a little bit more about the partnership model, and because I looked at your on your website, there's some great brands in technology and other categories, and um, what's the mix of partners, and where's the kind of next partners that you're super excited to try and add to the mix?
Yeah. We've had some incredible partners. A big part of this as well is the fair chance employment side of it. You know, we, you have to understand that most organizations, they by default have it built into their systems that if you in any way have a criminal record, they're not going to consider you for employment. And getting over that barrier in the same way that I was talking about with our marketing is education. If you educate them about the realities of what these people have been through and what they have done to change to turn their lives around and what they're willing to do, some of the hardest working people in the world, in my opinion, um, the employers say, okay, we'll give it a shot. And then it's the results are unbelievable. We've had folks come out of prison and through a partnership with Slack get six-figure jobs coming out of prison as coders for Slack. Um, Other tech organizations like Asana, um, organizations like GoDaddy, we've had these amazing partnerships with. But then also we have two, the Pacers basketball team out there in Indiana have hired two of our graduates and they're absolutely thriving. And they're saying, okay, that's a partnership we're going to be expanding, potentially not just in the Pacers, but into multiple organizations within the NBA. And so the whole concept of fair chance employment, educating these organizations, showing them what's possible when you give someone a chance and it's completely contagious once we've done it because they see the results and they say this is exactly the kind of person that we want to have in our organization. Is there anyone else you got? you know
Right.
and and that's also has an exponential effect in itself because for example in the example of the Pacers, we don't know but we could expand very quickly into the NBA, and that's really cool because this is these are not only organizations that people want to work for, but they have a lot of influence. And when they start to speak as well about being a fair chance employer, it's going to make even bigger waves in other industries. Um, and on the technological side, I mean, we have an amazing partnership with Apple. They bring some huge amount of devices into our facilities for all the team at the last mile. And yeah, the list goes on and on. There are a bunch of really cool organizations. You can find them all on our website.
That's fantastic. Um, so as a marketer, as you gather insights to leverage in the work that you do, and you know, there, what you described as an ecosystem where there's always more that you could be doing because I mean,
Right.
there's so many constituents and entities to encourage and bring along on the journey. Uh, and you've got the multiplier problem of you need funders and supporters to do the good work you do while also doing getting the correction departments on board, and there's so many layers to it. Uh, are there any surprising insights or areas and ways of finding those insights that you'd like to share that because I one of the things as a marketer I'm always compelled by is the almost blind luck or circumstance of where insights come from.
Right.
Because we try so hard to be great at like mining for them, but some of the most compelling ones I've ever worked with and some of the work I'm most proud of, the insight actually came not from our effort to find it, but just in the journey of doing the work we did. Any examples of that or stories of insights that were magical for you?
Well, one of you're right. The systems that we're working within, for example, in the example of the last mile is, there's a lot of barriers. There's a lot of legacy systems that are highly resistant to change. battleships that are really difficult to turn. And, you know, bringing it back to that entrepreneurial mindset that I talked about, you have to be open to looking at it from a new perspective every single time that you open up that case in your head. And one of the best ways that I found, and that, we talk about this all the time in the organization, is open yourself up and start talking to folks all over the place in every single industry. Doesn't
Mhm.
matter. If you're talking to an intelligent person, and I don't care if they run their own HVAC company in such and such state, or they're an entrepreneur trying to start something down in Florida, you know, I love it when I start talking about what it is that we do and all the problems that we face, being really open about it, being honest. And those people start to say, well, yeah, actually, you know what? There's, in my industry, this we work on this thing, and there's this technology, or we worked with this investor who is doing this. And every single time we end up meeting someone or encountering a technology, or figuring out some sort of systems solution that we never even would have considered because it was completely outside of our wheelhouse originally. And that's something that, I'm here in Germany, right? I'm working this job remote, but I am constantly on LinkedIn messaging people saying, I love what you do and I want to know more about how you do it. Really bringing curiosity and genuine, interest to learn into that conversation. And over again, we keep encountering, especially, in my explorations, I keep encountering potential partners, uh, potential solutions, interesting people. I mean, the worst that can happen is you make a new friend, right? So it's like,
Right.
and from a marketing side, I wish I could take credit for this, but I got to call out my man, Ben Lear, who's the head of marketing for the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. He hit me up on LinkedIn, said, dude, I love what you're doing. Um, with, a couple parts of can we get on a call sometime and just talk shop? I said, absolutely. He has quickly become one of my friends. And now, the last mile, because of that single LinkedIn message, we are entering into a large scale partnership with the Anti Recidivism Coalition, which is going to have huge implications for both organizations in the coming years. And first of all, have Ben on your podcast. He's awesome. And, but also, be open to those conversations, be curious, and, be honest.
Mhm.
Talk about what problems you're facing. Don't pretend like everything is gravy when it's not. Never is for any organization. So that's always the advice I give to almost anybody, but definitely for folks who are working in these systems, working with complex problems, especially in marketing.
Yeah, it's, I I I often poke fun at the term best practices, because the notion of a best practice applying across industries is almost it's almost illogical, right? The even if you're in the same exact industry, the dynamics of the culture and the organization is different enough that it doesn't often apply. But I think your approach to mining for insights and being receptive to I mean, because you're basically creating an organizational pathway that didn't exist, doesn't exist, and
Right.
so you have to create it. And whether it's a tip from a small entrepreneur's business to somebody that's worked in the industry, being receptive to that, I think is really smart. And I give you credit for being egoless about it, because I think that the best marketers are, even though they might present as being of alpha personality a lot of
Right.
times, but if they behind the scenes aren't receptive to the universe giving them stuff that they wouldn't otherwise receive, they miss a lot of stuff. I mean, that's just a
100%.
reality. Yeah.
Yeah. And I agree when you're on best practices fully, because it's like, what is best practices even from one year to the next within the same industry,
Right.
especially in
Right.
the tech world that we're living with now. AI is flipping everything on its head. And the only way that you're going to stay agile is if you continue to know, as much as you possibly can of what's going on out there. You definitely don't know it all. So, read a lot of
Yeah.
books and talk to a lot of people, right?
Yeah, exactly. Um, are there any things that you did last year that you're not gonna do this year because you've found that they've lost their traction, or it was a good experiment but
Mm.
didn't pan out? And then are things that you have on your agenda that, you're beginning to test and learn and to see if it holds value in today's marketplace.
Mm. Would you say from a marketing perspective or an organizational?
Either, I think the difference is almost hard to define,
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
isn't everything marketing on some level?
Yeah. One thing we did as from a storytelling perspective, we ran an amazing podcast with SiriusXM radio called The Last Mile Radio. Check
Mm.
it out, lastmileradio.org. Um, Amazing show. Every single episode is a deep dive with someone who's in some way associated with the justice systems. They might be a person who was wrongfully convicted. They might be a famous musician. They might be, we've had a huge range of people on there, from governors to Nile Rodgers to folks on the inside right now. And amazing show. We created a lot of good content, had a huge amount of positive feedback. But what we realized as an organization is that having a different face, doing that podcast thing where, uh, you're kind of circling around a concept, but if you have that larger story to tell, like in terms of what you're doing here, you're there by bringing these faces in. It makes sense, right?
Mhm.
But for us, we've got something that's happening on the inside of prisons that people don't quite understand, and it is a much larger story than anecdote, because it is a system. So we decided to step back from that show, and we're going to be looking at it from much higher, a much larger systems driven perspective of here's what the incarceration system as a whole looks like in the United States. And here's we're going to show you the way that we plan on building this from the ground up, rebuilding this into a rehabilitative system. So we stepped away from kind of like episodic interview based podcasting because it wasn't the right fit for us and the mission of our organization where we are going. And we are going to be stepping into some really cool stuff, much more in the style of Imagine, documentary style or docu-series, where it is an educational experience. It is entertaining, but also it is, it's inviting people into a movement that is going to be evolving over the coming years. And by following it, they are gradually learning and becoming a part of that movement, right? So that's one thing that we're excited for. It's coming. We've got some big, really amazing projects that I wish I could mention here on the call, but we are not quite public yet. And when those start to come to life, that's going to be in the completely next level for us in terms of as a storytelling entity.
Well, I definitely we'll have to get you back on to tell that.
Deal, deal.
The I mean, I worked on a brand in the pharma space that was a opioid recovery solution that and the way that the approach that we took, because we identified that the evil that we were facing was societal acceptance that addiction happens and it's bad people. And the reality is that a lot of addiction happens accidentally, and the addicts are all around us. They're rabbis, they're school teachers, they're coaches, they're, fathers and mothers and
Yep.
cousins, and it strikes me that you're facing a similar thing in that what your movement needs to be or could be is accepting that recidivism happens is not okay.
Right.
And to prove that successful reentry is not only possible, but should be the expectation. And that for society and prisoners to accept that. I mean, it's a mindset set shift, right? Like the transition to I believe this will work and this is the outcome instead of 60% are going to fall back.
Right.
I mean, at the core of it, that's it's that shift, which is not inconsequential and quite difficult, but through storytelling and depth of clarity around the fact that this is not only possible, but it's an expectation,
Right.
um, that has a lot of potential and a lot of power to it.
Absolutely. Just to accept consensus reality is what we do as human beings. It's a survival tactic. You
Right.
have to accept and adapt and move forward. But the fact is that once these legacy systems have been around, and our up to our great grandparents have lived with this very similar style system of incarceration to what we have today.
Yeah.
That system can and should change, and here's why. You know, and like you said, there are folks who will unfortunately benefit from the system, and they're the ones that are in charge. So, in many cases. So, exactly, education, storytelling, emotion, bringing the humanity into it, and then showing them a real solution that actually works on on,
Yeah.
on the other side of that.
Yeah, I think, yeah, to get the perception to shift to expecting it to work as opposed to expecting it not to, I think all that definitely ladders up because, ignorance is bliss for people choosing to not engage, and, but storytelling, and, even weaving it clear back to music, there's entry points into the psyche of people that are receptive that, can make that change,
Yep.
and I think that all humans have the potential and power to get on board with better. Um, and so part of the challenge as marketers is how do we show them the light? How do we show them the
Right.
opportunity,
Exactly.
and de-risk it, both personally and societally, which is the challenge. So, great conversation. I love all the work you're doing, and thank you for the hard work there because I'm sure there are days that you just want to pull your hair out, as any marketer would say, but
Of course.
the difference you're making is much more substantial than many in marketing where we didn't sell an extra burger this week, okay, it's a difference that's tangible, and
I love my job. I tell it to everybody. I'm very lucky, and I'll represent myself all day on LinkedIn, on my own Instagram, talking about this stuff because I think it's real. And
yeah.
it, feel very fortunate to have found that.
So, you great story to now. One of the major streaming media companies called and they want to do a biopic on you. What's the name of the film, or who's going to play you, or what's the plot or theme?
Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about myself. A little nugget here. One of my biggest daily acts of self development is keeping a dream journal. It might
Mm,
sound a little strange or esoteric, but every night, every morning I wake up, I write down all of my dreams in as much detail as I can. And, every night our consciousness is processing the actions, all the information, all the points of self development into these little vignettes of simulated reality. And I find there's a lot to learn from that space. And after years of practice, I've been recording my dreams for years now. I gain reflections and daily behaviors. It helps me hone my moral compass. And an incredible side effect of this is the more often you do this, the more lucid often you can become lucid in that dream. So I've become, I realize I'm dreaming and now I'm in this simulated reality that's better than the holodeck from Star Trek. It's incredible. And I can proactively interface with myself. And being here in Germany, the mentality of becoming more lucid has deeply entered my waking state as well. I'm constantly in a new environment. I'm awake to the people, to the systems, to the history around me. And that kind of waking lucidity has created this really beautiful virtuous cycle in my own development as a person that um, I can find is helping me develop skills that I can bring to the rest of the world, that I can bring to my job. So I thought about your question for a bit. It vexed me for a bit. I'm not going to lie, but I think the name of my movie is Lucid. Um, and it's about the act of waking up in your dreams, waking up in your life, and then also waking up to the systems around you that you take as, when you're dreaming, you're like, you got this elephant walking in your living room and you've got, people talking on their phones, walking around your ceiling or whatever it is. And you're like, oh, yeah, that's normal. Well, we do the same thing in our waking life. We do the same thing like we were talking about with the prison systems and with all these legacy systems that can change. And so, yeah, I think in terms of who could act me, I really love I love what Daniel Radcliffe is doing. Ever since his Harry Potter days, he stepped into the wild and weird and wonderful parts of humanity in his filmmaking. So I think he'd be just right. My life is pretty wild and weird and wonderful. So that's my answer for that question, I guess.
That's fantastic. I love it.
Cool.
And lots of layers to that we'll have to dig into next time we talk.
Cool.
Robert, this has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you again for all the work you're doing. And I look forward to continuing the dialogue both in podcast land, but even beyond.
Oh, this has been great, Chris. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Awesome. And with that, we'll wrap up another episode of Beyond the
Oh, wait,
Brief.
can I tell people how to hit me up?
Yes, please do.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah, no problem. I want to stand by what I said earlier. I'm down to have a conversation. My email is robert.roche, ROCHE, at thelastmile.org. You can find me in I'm actually Robert P. Roach III on LinkedIn. That's my real name. And you can also hit up thelastmile.org. Please follow us on social media and join this movement.
I love it. That's fantastic. Thanks again. And with that, we will wrap another episode and look forward to our next conversation in the marketing world.
Thanks, Chris.